Okay, now let's talk a little bit about supply. So, supply. You notice I kind of kept the same basic framework because we can use it to talk about supply. So supply, the definition of supply starts out the same. It's the willingness and ability of, well, we'll go back to a market, right? Buyers and sellers. We've already talked about buyers, so now we have to talk about sellers. So supply is the willingness and ability of sellers to what? Goods and services. Produce. And I will say this, it can be, generally speaking, it's easier for folks to imagine and to think about being a buyer because you've done that before. You've done that your whole life. It's not quite as easy to think as a seller. Unless you've owned your own business or have a really good imagination about what it's like to own your own business, it can be more difficult and more of a mental challenge or leap to think as a seller, to think as somebody that owns their own business. But the definition works the same way, right? Willingness and ability. Willingness, you have to want to bring something to market, right? You have to want to open that coffee shop or that brewery, or you have to want to make those masks for sale and distribution. There's plenty of things that people don't want to make. I don't know. Knitting sweaters for goldfish. Probably not a lot of people want to do that. So willingness means that you as a seller want to bring that product to market and produce it. And you have to have the ability. A good example, again, ability usually kind of, it's not limited to, but it usually kind of boils down to cash. Good example would be starting your own car company. I may have the willingness to want to start my own car company, but if I don't, can't get the funding and can't get the deal together, then I don't have the ability. But willingness and ability, you have to want to do it, and you have to have the wherewithal to be able to, for sellers to then produce and bring those goods and services to market. Okay. So again, we're looking at price and quantity. This time, though, with a high price, let's stick to, I think we used cookies before in our last example, so we'll just stick to cookies. So if you make cookies and the price is high, are you going to want to make a lot of them or a few of them? Now, if your first instinct was, I just want to make a few, then you're still thinking like a buyer, okay? Because think about this. At a high price, I should have introduced this equation earlier, but I'll go ahead and just introduce it now. The fundamental equation for all of business is revenue minus cost equals profit, okay? And the goal of every business, the goal of every firm is to maximize profit. So at a high price, your revenue is simply price times quantity, right? So assuming that your costs remain the same, at a high price, generally speaking, ceteris paribus, everything else the same, you generally enjoy a pretty high profit. So you want to make as many of whatever it is as possible. So at a high price, cookie manufacturers, producers are going to want to make a lot. At a low price, so as this drops down, and this remains the same, profit also decreases, and there's not the incentive to bring as much to market. And so what you see is as the price goes down, a producer is willing and able to produce fewer and fewer, okay? I'm going to get rid of this because we'll come back to that in some other video, but we don't need that right now. So that's what the basic supply schedule looks like. And what does the law of supply tell us then? It tells us as the price goes down, what happens to the quantity supplied? Well, the quantity supplied also goes down, and vice versa. The law of supply tells us as the price increases, the quantity supplied also increases, again, because manufacturers are interested in those high prices, okay? So, if I graphically display this information, what does it look like? Well, price is always here, quantity is always here, that's always 0. And we'll stick to, all right, so at $8, quantity 8, at 2, that's what it looks like. And I can fill in the rest of these 4 and 4, you know. But there, that's what a supply curve looks like. A supply curve, because the law of supply tells us that when price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. So that's a direct or positive relationship. And a direct or positive relationship is reflected in the graph as an upward sloping line. So that's what the supply curve looks like. All right. So we've talked about demand. We've talked about supply. Now let's see what happens when we kind of bring them all together. Okay.